This is my analysis of the Democratic candidate debate on CNN. Like the Republican debate, this debate was not a real debate. It's a joint press conference. The difference being that the journalists are the ones who choose the questions as opposed to the people debating. That's the first difference. The other thing is that since it's not a one-on-one, it's difficult to see what the positions are amongst them. And then the same issue, there's a conflict of interest between what CNN would like to do and actually discussing the merits of the policies of the various candidates. And this is why you really don't find out the reasoning that supports each person's position, because you don't have time to get into that. So essentially, what's wrong with this debate is that there is no identification of the principles that they're using to come to their public policy positions. On the fundamental issue of war and peace, for example, we have the fact that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders have a difference of opinion. The moderator asked them, when would you go to war, when would you not, or when do you think we should go to war? And they all hide behind war would be the last resort. But saying that war would be the last resort is not a principle and does not tell you when they would go to war, because anybody at any time can say, well, it's the last resort now, so let's go to war. That's the problem. You have this problem. And the candidates, since they don't state the principle, you really don't know when they would go to war, when they would not. In the case of Bernie Sanders, he would go to war on humanitarian issues, I guess, and if we're attacked, I guess, and he would go to war less than Hillary Clinton because she's willing to go to war. She was willing to go to war in Iraq, and she says that she's in favor of flying over Syria and Iraq, which is a euphemism for bombing Syria and Iraq. And so nobody wants to say that they're bombing these people and that we are at war with them. They just want to say we're flying over them. Anyway, if the moderator had pressed them, or if they were having a real debate between each other, you could ask them to state the principle. Then we would know in what kind of cases they would go to war and what kind of cases they wouldn't. And that essential defect runs through the whole debate on every issue. So, for example, on redistribution of wealth, the real difference that was discussed mostly was Bernie Sanders' socialist communist position. He's in favor of wholesale redistribution of wealth. Why? Because he believes in the idea that the wealth produced does not belong to the person that produced it. It belongs to everyone. And to some extent, all the candidates have this view. So since it belongs to everyone, if some people are getting more and other people are getting less, that's not fair, since it belongs to everyone. Whereas in a capitalist system, if you're a capitalist, you believe that the person producing the wealth is the owner of the wealth, and that is the person that can decide how to use and dispose of the wealth, and the government can't take their property to give it to someone else. In other words, the government can't do forced charity, because usually it's charitable purposes that are put forth for the redistribution, and eventually the redistribution goes to everything except or including charity, such as farm subsidies and foreign aid and this and that. So the lack of principle is why you can't get clarity on everybody's position. Some of the other candidates that were against the war in Iraq, like Webb and Chafee and O'Malley, they would probably go to war less, but you really don't know when. And even Sanders said he was in favor of flying over Syria and this and that. So he would also get us involved in a bombing war, at least not boots on the ground, but a bombing war, which is still a war. And there's no reasoning to differentiate when you should go to war and when you shouldn't, because there's no identification of the principle. Now, the moderator asked him a question he should have asked, what is your principle? But he says, do you think we should go to war, and when do you think we shouldn't? Or when do you think we should go to war? And because it's not clear that he's asking for a principle, he doesn't get a principle, and therefore we cannot know what they're going to do. And this the same kind of thing happens in redistribution of wealth. There's no distinction between what it is to be a capitalist, what it is to be a socialist. What's the difference in principle? And why do people come to a different position? And which principle is correct? Should the owner of the property, the person who produced it, be the owner? Or should it belong to everyone? Hillary Clinton said that she was a capitalist but moderate. In other words, she wants to take some of the wealth that the owner produced and redistribute it. Now, if you want to see a good insight into Bernie Sanders' view on government and rights, then you can take a look at the interview I did with him. And you'll also get a glimpse into his true character, because when I do an interview, I press for the fundamentals in their thinking, and often if there's some poison inside, the bad character, you can see it right at the end of the interview where it all comes out. Anyway, with regards to other issues, the same thing happens. So all of them are basically in favor of minimum wage. Apparently, Bernie Sanders is in favor of more minimum wage than anybody else, $15 an hour. So it goes along that same spectrum. He's the most going to distribute the most goodies to the most people. Essentially, that's the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Republican Party will always want to redistribute a little bit less than the Democrats, or you can look at it the other way. The Democrats always want to redistribute a little bit more. So an election, in their perspective, is how can I get 51% of the people to agree with me? Well, I will offer them this freebie and the other freebie and this special gift to these groups, and the person who offers the most, in this case Bernie Sanders, is the likely winner, because he's going to promise to give more away of other people's wealth, of other people's money, and that's the thing that's always omitted. But he doesn't think it's other people's money because he doesn't think they own it, because he doesn't believe in capitalism. He doesn't believe in property rights. He doesn't believe in the principle that the person that produces it should be the one that has the right to decide when to use it, when not to. The other thing that's never discussed is the clear immorality of redistribution of wealth and initiating physical force against people that haven't violated anybody's rights. That's what you will see if you see the interview that I did with Bernie Sanders. You will see his view, his thinking explored on that issue. That isn't raised in the debate. So other things that were discussed were climate change. They're basically all, anybody who expresses anything, they're all in favor of climate change legislation. Bernie Sanders is the one that thinks it's the most important threat to the United States. Of all the threats, that's the most important, climate change, because it'll ruin the whole world. So, of course, he thinks that's the most important thing. The others said a few words to favor climate change legislation. But he is the one that wants to do the most, I guess, because he thinks it's the worst problem. They said a little bit about affirmative action. They tried to placate Black Lives Matter interest group. The only one who said that all lives matter was Jim Webb. He's a courageous guy, and he probably lost some votes there. At least he was willing to say that. As you recall, O'Malley withdrew his view that all lives matter and said that only Black lives matter. In other words, he recanted his previous statement. The other interesting thing that happened in the debate was that regarding Hillary's emails, all of the candidates wimped out. None of them went after Hillary for having a private server that prevented the citizens and the government from ultimately determining if she made a proper decision when deleting emails and when deciding which emails were personal and which had to do with her function as a public servant. She made a decision, and since she had a private server, the government and the citizens could never review that question. So that's why it is not permitted, like she says, and she made it impossible for the citizens to access all this public information while she was in office. And that was, of course, the reason why she had a private server, so that when you made FOIA requests, it wasn't in the public record, so you could not access it. It was only by accident that the Benghazi committee found out that she had this private server. And then we all found out, well, what she was doing. She was trying to evade the requirement of a public service official having what? Available, ultimately, the record, and permitting the government to review when something was deleted improperly, when it wasn't, if it was personal, if it was governmental. Aside from all the issues of whether a private server is a secure place to keep top security issues, of course, the private server isn't the same as a government server. But anyway, none of those issues were addressed, and the audience was totally against discussing this question. The moderators picked up on it, and they let it lie. So that's my analysis of the debate. I mean, there's a few other things. They accused her of flip-flopping, Hillary, and they did point out all the things where she went back and forth, and her excuse was, I learned things, so I changed my mind. They asked her, well, what is it that you're learning? Are you learning that the people will vote against you if you have this position? And she said, no, just learning. Anyway, it was a typical Democratic debate, in the sense that they also concentrated on attacking the Republicans and blaming the Republicans for everything. And so the other thing that you might want to know as an insight into the Democratic mentality is it's all about how you feel and how to do charity with other people's money. And I think Bernie Sanders, as a socialist, he's winning that race because he's going to give away more of your stuff. So stay tuned for another analysis on another subject, and give me your comments. Thanks for listening.